G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it.
Rebecca, thanks so much for making the time to catch up. I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you since we met, largely because I think it's such an important area and sometimes overlooked, particularly when we're dealing with small growing businesses and all the focus is on marketing and sales and cash flow and getting our systems sorted out. And often what gets missed is the health and well-being of the people, whether they're the leaders growing the business or the people in the business. Like I say, thanks for making the time to catch up.
Great. Thank you, Rob. Thanks. Great to be here.
I guess just as way of introduction, why don't I let you tell our audience a little bit about who you are and the type of work that you do?
Sure. My name is Dr. Rebecca Chabot, and I'm actually a scientist that has a PhD in science. And I've been practicing in academia and studying and researching for 25 years science. But alongside my science career, I've also been studying and practicing wellness and mindfulness and the various forms of those. A few years back, probably 5 years ago, I merged these two things because I saw that there is a great need for people to learn the tools and technique of wellness, but the science behind it as well, the research-based practices, to be first convinced that there's a need, that there's evidence to show that these things actually improve our lives, and then to learn how to do it, what to do, so that you're not just inspired and then walk away and say, oh, now what do I do? But you're inspired, you're convinced that it's relevant and necessary, could help your life if you do it, and then you know exactly what to do and how to do it. So basically, my business, Purewellness Tasmania, is really about teaching people the tools and strategies that they can implement on a daily basis that are based in science, that will improve the way they're living, that will improve their mental health and well-being, but as well as their physical health and well-being. So these are small things that we can all learn and do and adopt in our daily lives that really boost our wellness as well as our performance in work and on the job.
Right. Tell me, who are the typical clients that you like to work with, and why is it that they will tend to reach out to you? What seems to be going on for people when they want to reach out and work with you?
Well, my typical client really is some business, a small business or a larger business. And it's often either the leadership team who are recognizing the signs of burnout within the teams, of exhaustion, depression, of overload, stress, absenteeism, presenteeism, those sorts of symptoms that they're starting to see play out in their workplace, and they themselves want to get a handle on it. Or it might be I work with the actual teams in the workplace. So I can do both, and I really believe both are necessary. But basically, it's learning these, I guess you could almost call them self-care techniques that will help us present at the workplace in a much healthier way. And that influences the culture of the workplace if we come feeling whole, as opposed to if we come feeling depleted. And particularly for leaders or executives who, if you turn up on the job and you yourself are overly stressed or anxious or depleted, then it's really difficult to be there for your teams. It's really difficult to actually assist them in whatever it is they're going through. And in fact, sometimes you feel frustrated or angry that they even have problems because you haven't dealt with your own. It's learning how to start to actually look at ourselves first, recognize how to fill ourselves up so that we then can enter the workplace with an energy that's much more beneficial and productive to the job.
Yeah, that's a really nice way to put it. Tell me, what is typically your approach, I guess, whether you're working with leaders or teams, and tell me if that's a little bit different, but what's the approach that you take, whether that's a process or, I guess, an approach?
Generally, I think the first place to start is with boosting self-awareness. Having some degree of self-awareness has been identified as one of the number one factors for leaders as well as for workers. Because if you don't recognize that the thoughts you think influence your moods, or that what you believe impact your behaviors, or the words you use have an effect on the people around you, if you don't have that basic degree of self-awareness, then you can't start to make changes that need to be made. The first place to start is really with self-awareness. We need to be able to see where our thought or our emotions or our stories or beliefs are actually playing out in our lives, and especially in negative ways, so that we can then pull back and go, okay, I'm going to tweak that, I'm going to change that so that I can improve the way that I'm behaving or thinking or speaking. So self-awareness really is the first step, and that's whether I'm working with the leaders or whether I'm working with the teams. It really is the first place to start. The second kind of piece of that is like, okay, so I recognize that I need to become self-aware. How do I do that? So the next step really is teaching people the techniques or tools that help to improve self-awareness. And again, these are science-based. These are things that years, decades of research has now identified as hugely beneficial tools. And often these tools fall under the category of mindfulness. So practices such as breath work, for example, are tools that I will then teach my clients how to use the breath. The breath is something we all have access to all day, every day. It's free. And we can change the way that we breathe to help us regulate ourselves, to help us reduce our levels of stress, to help us in a moment of intensity. So using the breath is an amazing tool, and it's something that you don't have to step out of your routine to do. You can actually kind of use it on the go, which is extremely powerful. Breath work is one of the best tools that I can teach. Another one is meditation. Meditation has, again, it's unequivocally been shown how it improves our mental and physical health, the practice of meditation. So this is another thing that people, leaders and workers can start to use to become more self-aware. When we take the time to stop and actually look at the thoughts that we're thinking, some 90% of our thoughts actually aren't even true. So if you don't have a way to filter out the good thoughts from the bad ones, or the true ones from the untrue ones, then you're going to be on this kind of crazy roller coaster of being a kind of a victim to your errant thoughts. Learning these practices is the next step. And then the final step in what I take people through is helping them recognize that this is an ongoing practice. This isn't a tick the box exercise. You learn how to meditate, you do it once, and then you're all good. It's not the way it works. So I like to talk about mental health in terms of mental fitness, because I feel that that really implies that there's this ongoing practice to it. In the same way that physical fitness requires an ongoing practice, your body is strong as long as you're practicing whatever it is you do, the gym or running or whatever. But as soon as you stop, you start to lose that strength and fitness. And the same applies with mental fitness or mental health. We have to adopt this as something that is like a habit in our lives. We have to do this on a regular basis in order to reap the benefits, in order to strengthen this muscle of the brain. That's basically what we're doing when we practice breath work or meditation. We're starting to change the way our own brains work. And that's the strength that starts to build, and that's the resilience, and that's the robustness that we take to work. That's the happiness that starts to come. And then, of course, the self-awareness, which is where we started. For building this self-awareness, we're able to then start to identify what in our lives needs changing, and then we've got the tools to start to change it. That's kind of the process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, fantastic.
Want specific advice to help you get your business through its #1 growth challenge? Book a free 20-minute growth chat with me, Troy, the founder of Grow a Small Business. I'll recommend some resources which will help you grow your business with ease so you can live the lifestyle you've signed up for. Go to growasmallbusiness.com and click on Growth Chat.
And And I know this question's a little without notice, but I'm interested in your thoughts on the concept of work-life balance. I hear sort of different approaches to work-life balance from some people saying, well, you need to have enough time away from work to be able to strike a balance, whereas other people will look at it as, no, it's more of an integration and you can't separate work and life, and you need to be able to have wellness across both of them. Do you have any particular views on that concept of work-life balance and what it means?
The answer is really both. They're both true because it really depends on the individual. I mean, as individuals, we're all so different, and no one understands this more than a scientist. It's really difficult to be able to understand the variability in human behavior, human brains, human bodies. Like, we are all so individual. And so what works for one person may not work so well for another person. But regardless, across the board, what we know is that work-life balance is necessary, whether you integrate it more and kind of spread out your work, or whether you have distinct patches of work and no work, whatever works for you. But one thing is for sure is that if we tip that balance to an overload, to feel to where we are now feeling chronically stressed, then we can't perform. We can't produce in the way, we are less effective, and we must bring the balance back in whatever form that looks for the individual. It's so necessary, because as soon as the balance is tipped and we are in that state of stress, studies show that some people are actually a large amount of people are undergoing chronic stress that's round the clock. So not even just during the day, but they're even sleeping in this kind of fight or flight mode, this elevated state of our nervous system. And we must develop and learn tools that help us bring that activated state back down to a more restful state, so that we can think clearly, so that we can problem solve and think creatively, and our memories work better. These things kind of shut down when we are in a fight or flight mode. We can't think clearly. Our memory does, all sorts of things start to shut down. If you don't have that balance, if you're elevated kind of all the time and you're not sleeping well because your mind's racing, if that stuff is happening, then you really do need to learn ways to bring yourself back down, and then practice those things on a regular basis so that you don't go back there. And that's not to say we won't get stressed. Of course, we're all going to get stressed on a daily basis, most likely, but you just don't stay there. That's the key.
Yeah, great. Most people are familiar with that state that you've described, where you can't think clearly, you can't remember things, your nervous system feels like it's just constantly on. It's not a nice place to be. I must say, we come across a lot of clients in the small business space that not too far away from that when they're reaching out to us for support around business coaching. We've got a couple of courses, Transform Your Performance, which is very much focused on, I guess, the individual and better work practices, largely to help people feel in more control and be able to reduce that stress. A bit like our business transformation program, which at the end of the day is about giving people a roadmap they can follow, which helps them feel a little more in control, a little clearer on where they're going, to try and just one part of helping to relieve some of those symptoms that you talked about.
It's so important having a roadmap, actually. It's so important knowing where you're going. If you don't have that map ahead of you, then you end up just kind of bobbing around and maybe feeling a bit aimless and lost. And then the stress really amplifies. Having a roadmap is great that you offer that, because it's super important work.
Yeah, I guess the next thing I was going to touch on was maybe some examples or case studies of clients that you've worked with, just to help bring some of this to life. What does it look like in reality, and what could people expect if they were working with you?
I work with, like I said, individual leaders or teams of leaders, and I also work with the more general workforce. One example that I'm currently, a client that I have at the moment, is a law firm, and they hired me 2 years ago to come in on a weekly basis to their in person to their actual law firm, and to come in every Thursday at lunchtime and deliver a talk talk, and it's informal. It's around a boardroom table. It's fairly informal, but we educate them about some of these practices, about what the science says about mindset or the science of happiness or other well-being practices. And then we practice together sitting there. And we've been doing that now for almost years, and an incredible thing to watch how the culture in that practice has really improved and changed, and they're really happy with the outcomes. Although I was saying I would love to have some data on it, and that at this stage it's just anecdotal, but I'll be working on that. And then there are leaders who I've worked with, and again, it's more looking at their own self-care rituals, their own habits, their own levels of self-awareness to start to boost that, so that then when they go into their leadership role, they're more able to accommodate. There's new legislation in Tasmania around psychosocial safety in the workplace. I've been hearing over the last 4 months how all these leaders are feeling like, oh my goodness, how do I deal with this? What do I do? I've worked with some of these leaders to help them recognize that while there are strategies and systems that need change in the organizational level, absolutely all these different systems need to be updated and implemented. But there's also real importance for the leader themselves to start to make shift in the way that they lead. And because we know that the way that they turn up to work is contagious. And so if a leader turns up work feeling empowered and energetic and curious and excited, then they're going to have a completely different workforce and workplace than they would if they turn up on a daily basis feeling stressed, frustrated, and angry. And right, it's really important. I mean, it does rest on the leader, fortunately or unfortunately, a lot rests on the leader. And so it's a stressful position. It's a difficult role to play in any business, small or large. So leaders need support. They need support on what can I do for myself so that I am a better leader, so that I have the capacity to take care and support the psychosocial environment in my workplace. How do I do that? And some of my work has been around helping leaders figure that out for themselves, how to get there.
Yeah, fantastic. So look, we've gone through a wealth of information and concepts in the last 20 minutes or so. If there's a small business owner that is listening to this podcast today who had to take away, what's the one thing they could practically do today or tomorrow that you think make a little bit of difference in this space and just help a little bit with health and wellness? What would your advice be on that? And it's always difficult to nail it to one, but I'm interested in your thoughts here.
It is. It's difficult to nail it to one. I would say, and maybe this is avoiding that, nailing it to one thing, but I would say learn a technique that helps you. And look, it's going to look a little different from person to person. Some people really love practicing meditation. They get into the groove of it and it feels really good. But whether it's meditation or breath work or other forms of mindfulness practice or self-awareness practice, I would say get started now, get started today. And this is something that once we learn it and once we see the impacts of it in our work life and in our home lives, once we learn these practices and we start to put them into place and we see the impacts, we wish we had known it for decades. So there's no time like the present to go ahead and get started on your practice that's going to really improve your life overall, both in terms of mental fitness as well as physical fitness. These practices like breath work, like meditation, have impacts that really go all the way through our physical and mental states. There's no time like the present. We can all change. We can all start to make change. And now is really the time to do that.
Beautiful.
I hope that answered the question all right, Rob.
It did. It's maybe more than one thing, but it always is never that simple. That's great. And just finally, for people who have been inspired by this conversation today, where can they find out a little bit more about you and connect with you?
Well, my business is called Purewellness Tasmania, and I have a website, purewellnesstasmania.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn and social media, Instagram, Facebook. You can also reach out to me on email, rebecca@purewellnesstasmania.com. And even though Tasmania is in the name of my business, I do work via Zoom or fly around the country in person as well. I'm certainly not limited to Tasmanian business. I'd mention that.
Fantastic. Well, Rebecca, thanks so much for the chat today. That was really interesting. It's given me personally a few things to think about as well, and I'm sure our listeners will get lots from that. Thanks again.
Great. Thanks so much, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Want to help other small business owners improve their business? There's one quick thing you can do, which is jump over to iTunes and leave a review. Or if you don't have an account, follow us on Spotify.